Trek Profiles Podcast, Episode 63, recorded February 2022. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we interview a Star Trek fan and we learn their fandom story. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, Episode 63. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Spoiler warning, this episode may discuss any episode as of the date of the recording, so if you are sensitive to spoilers, proceed at your own risk. You have been warned, Human. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the coldly calm, comfortably collegial yet never careless M5 Multitronic unit. Say hello, M5.
The M5 unit is online.
Let's see the news and announcements, M5.
Messages posted.
This is an independent Star Trek podcast. If you'd like to support us, the best way you can do that is to follow us wherever you get your audio. We are on all the major platforms, and your following us helps other Trek fans find us. My interview with my guest Ron in this episode is around 90 minutes or so, but you'll note that the episode length is much longer due to an abundance of lightly edited bonus content, outtakes, and whatnot. They will all come at the end after the ending audio cards, so you can enjoy them or not, as you choose. Let's review the lightning round questions from episode 60 with everyone's favorite Klingon from Star Trek The Experience, Paul Mattingly. You can only choose one, engage the warp engines or fire the phasers. Paul was all the way in on the warp, and in the poll you all agreed by 80 to 20%. Choose your honorable vacation destination, visit Boreth or visit Kronos. The Gormagander street food was too much of an attraction, and both Paul and the people picked the Klingon homeworld by 70 to 30%. You must bring a feline companion on your next deep space mission. Will it be Spot, Grudge, or Isis? Paul was for Spot, but the Queenly Grudge was the winner in the online poll by 46%. Spot had 39 and Isis 15. Meow. You are invited to be a guest at the next Dax Ziantara. Would you rather have drinks with Curzon or play Dabo with Jadzia? Dabo was the thing for both Paul and the poll respondents, and the poll was a 72 to 28% margin of victory for Dabo with Jadzia. And finally, which is scarier, Feklir or Gowron's eyes at full burn? Gowron was in fact the choice of both my guest and the Twitter tweeps. The margin of the poll was 80 to 20%. So, glory to you and your house. Now, if you enjoyed those questions and would like to take a stab at writing your own for possible inclusion in the show, send them to me at feedback@trekprofiles.com or DM me on Twitter. Okay, I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge a nice show review that came across my way from listener Generosity on Podchaser. Generosity says, I love listening to episodes of Trek Profiles. Not only is it great to hear about all the different ways in which people love Star Trek, but it also has helped me feel more included in the online Star Trek community. I love hearing different origin stories and how many other people have had Star Trek impact their lives for the better. The interviews are so well done and edited, and it's always fun to listen to the next episode. End quote. Well, thank you, Generosity, for that lovely review, and I thank all of you for listening to my show. Okay, one other quick announcement before we get into the interview. My guest Ron, as you will discover during the interview, actually owns a coffee shop with his own custom coffee. So if you've got a There's Coffee in That Nebula mug or your own favorite Raktajino cup, honestly, folks, what better thing to put into it than some coffee made and sold by not just a Trekkie, but a member of our little online Star Trek family? I tried some of his blends, and while I like them all, I want to tell you the Precipice Espresso Roast, that was my personal favorite, had a nice, rich coffee flavor, and it wasn't acidic or bitter at all. Ron did not ask me to talk about this. He didn't ask me to mention it. This is a 100% genuine personal recommendation from me to all of the coffee drinkers out there. So if you're interested, I'll put a link in the show notes to his online store. Pick up some of those beans. You won't regret it. All right, that's it for announcements. Let's get to it. M5, start the show.
M5 acknowledges.
He loves Captain Pike and that rascally Cardassian, Garrick, too. He's a Ferengi fan and also loves the Akira-class starship. He's from Bar Harbor, Maine, North America, Earth, in Sector 001. It's Ron Wrobel. Welcome, Ron, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Now, Ron, I happen to know that you're a listener of the podcast, so you were mentioning to me before that you're having a little bit of trepidation being on the show.
It's a little bit stressful. It's a lot of preparation, a lot of work. I'm really excited to talk about everything Star Trek.
There's no stress here, man. This is like a stress-free environment, right? Because all we're doing is talking about Star Trek, which is something we all love. So it's all good.
I keep falling back on that. I know the show. I know my passion. Let's do it. I'm excited.
All right. Well, the M5 says that I have to ask you question one, which is, are you a Star Trek fan?
I think so. I'm not one of those that online will gatekeep or tell people what you have to do to be a Star Trek fan, but I definitely consider myself to be a very big fan. My husband and I recently bought a house, and one of our stipulations was there has to be a room that I can claim, not as a man cave, as a ready room, and it has to have a Star Trek theme. We just moved in, and you can see the video. Our listeners can't, but behind me I have my wall of autographs, and just everything in this room has some sort of Star Trek connection. So I consider myself to be a pretty hardcore fan.
Well, you guys send me some pictures of that stuff, and I'll put it up on the show notes page over at Trek Profile.
Absolutely, I will.
I will say, you bring up something. I hesitate to get into something controversial so early in the episode, but you did spur a thought here, Ron. No, I'm serious, which is talking about gatekeeping. And I think one of the things I've tried to do with my show is if someone says they're a Star Trek fan, I believe them. And I don't really have a set of criteria about that like you have to like these episodes or the show in this particular way or for this particular reason or subscribe to these 7 beliefs that I believe to be true about Star Trek. If someone says they're a Trek fan, I believe them. And that's why it's question one on the show. But I've often seen, this is online and in other venues, people suggesting that you shouldn't gatekeep, but then people gatekeep and say you have to believe these 7 things to be a Star Trek fan.
If you haven't seen every episode, you're not a fan. No, just totally kidding.
That's the latest thing. Yeah, I think I saw that one too. Yeah, I was like, wow, that's a real bad take. But it seems really strange to me. It seems to like sort of denying the diversity of the fandom in a way, right? That people can like it in different ways. But I'm curious what you think about this.
No, I agree. I like football. I like the Patriots. I'm a fan. I can't name all the players on the team. I don't know right now if I could name more than 2 or 3 players on the team. But I consider myself to be a Patriots fan. On the flip side with Star Trek, I will never forget, I had an encounter with a coworker. We were doing an event that had different booths. And she was so excited to tell me that one of the teams had a Star Trek booth coming out. It was all Star Trek themed. It was going to be great. They were going to have C-3PO and Darth Vader. And, all I could do is nod my head and be like, her heart is in the right place. Anyone that wants to be a Star Trek fan, there's no qualifications. There's no test. There's no, you have to do X, Y, Z to be a fan. No, if you've watched the show, if you've watched Star Wars and think it's Star Trek and you want to be a fan, that's fine. Enjoy it. Have fun with it. When I came into the fandom...
Even that one, I might have to think about that for a minute. Right? Go ahead.
When I came into the fandom, people were so supportive and were so excited to meet another Trek fan. How can you not have that sort of reception for somebody that considers themselves to be a fan? Let's learn about each other and see what makes you a fan. Everybody wears it differently. Not everybody's going to have a room in their house that's dedicated to the show. It's everybody wears their fandom a little bit differently, and I think we need to embrace those differences. And it's IDIC. I mean, it's fandom in different combinations.
Wonderful, wonderful. So it seems like you are one of those people who has been into Star Trek since the beginning, since you can remember being aware of pop culture things. Do I have that right?
You do. I don't remember a point in my life where I didn't enjoy the show. I don't remember my first episode. My father was a fan that I think gatekeepers would look at and say, well, are you really a fan? He doesn't have a blog. He doesn't have a website. He's never been on a podcast, but he loves the show. And I remember watching Star Trek as a kid and just absolutely loving it.
So what is your earliest Star Trek memory?
My earliest memory is when I was in 2nd grade. My family visited the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. And I remember having, as a 2nd grader, a temper tantrum. We weren't able to get into the exhibit that had Captain Kirk's chair. And I don't even remember being a fan at this point. I don't remember having watched the show, but I remember freaking out as a kid and being like, no, I want to see this chair. And that, really is my first memory. But as I get older, I remember I collected the action figures and definitely didn't keep any of them in their boxes. But Star Trek has always been there. It's always been something I've just absolutely loved.
Which was your first Star Trek series?
Oh, TNG, 100%.
And does that still hold the top slot for you, or has it moved around a little bit?
It depends what day of the week you're talking to me. Typically, my go-to is Deep Space Nine. I love the stories there. I love that it's a little bit darker. I think it fits the modern genre a little bit more. I will say this before Strange New Worlds comes out, that I am anticipating Strange New Worlds being my Star Trek when it comes out. I love Captain Pike. I love the setup for this show.
Whenever Captain Pike comes up, I always want to ask this question, which is, are you like all the Captain Pikes, or do you have a particular iteration that you like more than others, or how are you feeling about Captain Pike? Because we have sort of the original, we got the Kelvin verse, and now we have the Discovery version. So what's going on there?
Yeah, it's funny, when they first announced Anson Mount was going to be Captain Pike, I wasn't all that excited. That's great. He was at the first STLV I went to. I didn't get a picture, didn't get an autograph. It's like, that's fine. But when we saw his presentation as Captain Pike, total transformation. And he's changed the way I look at that character. I'll look back at the Kelvin timeline. Great character. The original series, The Cage, The Menagerie, those are two of my favorite episodes now. Because when I see Captain Pike through Anson Mount's portrayal, I absolutely love that character. He's the epitome of what a Starfleet captain should be.
I have to admit, I was quite taken with the original Jeffrey Hunter Pike. And that's not in any way a slight against any of the other characters. It's just that I enjoyed the fact that at the place that character was at the beginning of The Cage / The Menagerie, is that he's like this very haunted sort of captain figure. And I really like that. I really like that idea that he's like, I'm tired of, choosing who lives and who dies. And like, you feel the weight of command, which is something like Kirk never, I think, dealt with a lot of that until much later, and I think like Star Trek's 2 and 3 is really him coming to terms with that late in his career, right? Whereas
Absolutely.
Pike was like in the middle of it, and was feeling it. And I was quite taken with that. So, and I've enjoyed Bruce Greenwood. I thought he was incredible. And I really enjoyed Anson Mount and look forward to what he does. So I think Captain Pike has been thumbs up all around.
Absolutely. The weight of command is something I've never served in the military. The closest I can come to that is I ran a hotel where I lived on site. So living at the hotel property, you're on call 24/7. You've got staff you're interacting with 24 hours a day. It bears on you. Burnout has to be a real thing. We look at the Starfleet officers and they're supposed to be the epitome of what mankind can accomplish, but still 24/7, you're going to get tired. And seeing that, I think that might be the most real portrayal of a captain. I think we saw it with Captain Janeway once. Cisco, we see a realistic side, but it gets tiring and you need a break. It bears on you.
As someone who is a veteran, I can tell you, one of the things I think that Star Trek has not really explored, in my opinion, and I don't know if it's even worthy of using the word exploration, but I think an area of storytelling that they didn't really jump into or chose not to focus on was the fact that when you're on a starship, and this would have been, I think, most amenable in the Voyager series. When you're on a starship, you are living, eating, and sleeping, and I mean lowercase s sleeping, with the same people 24/7, 365. And there is no difference between work and home. There isn't, right? It's all the same thing. And so you are taking your meals with the person who is sitting 2 feet to the right of you and sleeping, in the room next door, and you're hanging out together. And you might just, through the course of human events, you might jive with that person, or they just might not be your type of person, right? Which isn't anyone's fault. But my God, they're a loud eater. And I'm going to be talking about that like every day. Like, dude, just, eat with your mouth closed, or whatever it is, where they have some weird hobby that they won't stop talking about, it can literally drive you insane. And I would just love to, just have someone just be like, you know what? I'm still mad you cheated at checkers last night, man. So I don't want you on the away team, Because that was real life, bro. That was real life. Let me tell you.
There's an episode of Voyager, I call it Lower Decks. I know that's not the episode title, but we see 4 characters who just aren't fitting in on Voyager. And, that happens. There are people, like you said, there are people you work with day in and day out that you just, I don't want to sit next to you. You drink coffee, you smell funny. Like there's always something that you're like, I just can't stand this person. But you deal with it. We don't see any of that in Star Trek. You know, Seven of Nine, when she orders her protein packs, or whatever she calls them, that's going to get irritating if you're eating with her. You might love her, you might want to work with her, but that's going to get irritating. And we never see that side of the humanity in Star Trek.
I had a coworker who was incredibly health conscious, right? Like seriously health conscious, right? The guy was very fit. I mean, he was an Adonis, right? But for lunch, he ate this... like these soy cubes that were in vinegar, and it was like some kind of vinegar soy thing. And when he put that stuff in the microwave, the smell was astonishing, right? And like, you cannot fault the guy for wanting to eat healthy, but I was like, bro, I literally have to go outside when you are eating lunch. Like, I cannot take it, you know? And there's like absolutely nothing, you know, there's no fault. It's just a thing. But could you imagine, like, okay, you are now going to be living next to that person for the next for the rest of your life on the Voyager.
Exactly.
Like that's going to be a problem, you know? That's going to be an issue. So, all right. So I assume that you have seen all the Star Trek, Ron?
I have. So I thought I was a completist back when Star Trek came on Netflix back in like 2009, I think it was. And then during the pandemic, I said, I'm going to do it again. So I went all the way through and found a lot of episodes that I thought I had seen, but had no recollection of. And it was at that point I finally did the animated series. So finally went through the whole thing. And I've seen most of Star Trek several times, with the exception of the animated series and some of the original series.
Yeah, I think a lot of Star Trek fans have that, where we think we've seen it all, and then you go back and you're like, yeah, I know I've seen this, but I don't remember this.
And it's so hard.
I have that experience with Enterprise.
Right, and I'll do watch-throughs where the show's playing in the background. Yeah, I'm watching it, but chances are I'm doing something on the computer, I'm working, I'm not paying 100% attention to the television. So they've been on, I can't say I've seen them all 100%.
But they've been played in your presence.
Exactly.
Exactly. So... it sounded to me in our preliminary conversations that you were kind of a watch the show and enjoy Star Trek kind of guy. And then you started going to conventions and you had kind of an inflection point in your fandom. So talk about that.
Yeah, so I had my first convention was in 1996. I was in sixth grade. Didn't really become a huge convention guy at that point. And I kind of avoided the conventions thinking, you know, it's having seen the movie Trekkies, these aren't people I necessarily think I can associate with because they're a little off. And then went to the first convention. I planned to go for the 50 year, which didn't happen. I went for my first convention in 2019 and absolutely fell in love with Star Trek community. Through Twitter, through Facebook, really found a sense of community through the people that go to these events. And it really reignited my fandom. I had been a Star Trek fan well before that. I mean, I had been collecting stuff since I can remember, but that really lit a fuel under me and got me really back into the fandom.
Which was that very first convention you ever went to?
1996. And it was funny, I just moved and was going through some boxes, and I found my original little... admission card to it. I met Barbara March, who played either Larsa or Beator, got her autograph. And it was, as a kid, it was such a huge adventure for me to do that. And this was back when they had the little convention, so it was one right here in Portland, Maine. And it was just so much fun. And it wasn't for another maybe 20 years until I went to the next convention. And just, I absolutely love these events.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So which was the big one that you went to in 2019? Was that STLV?
STLV. And I'll tell you, I'm very much a planner. I had never liked the idea of Vegas. I went for work and said, you know what? Vegas isn't that bad. I'll go to the next Star Trek convention, and discovered the Shore Leave podcast, STLV 101, of which you were a part. And, you know, I'm a planner, and Creation does a great job, but I need a lot of details before I commit to doing an event. And through the Shore Leave podcast, I discovered, you know what, I can do this. I have enough information now to go in, be a type A personality, plan where I'm going for every meal, plan every step of the day. So jumped in, did it. And,
Ron.
You know, I told my husband, I'm like, I'm going to go once. It'll be a once in a lifetime deal. And as soon as I got back, I was like, you know what, I'm going to start planning for the next one. So I've been to every one of those since. And, you know, looking forward to Mission Chicago, and just anytime I can get out and do these conventions and see more of the fans, I'm there.
So I just have to ask this one question, which is of this incredibly detailed plan that you made for your first convention, about how closely did you adhere to it when looking in retrospect?
I still do this. I will plan out where I'm going to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it's 100% doesn't happen. But I like to have that go-to plan. You got to be in the spirit of
That's
things.
the answer, Rod.
Absolutely.
Because you start going to these, and you think like, oh, it's about these events, right? And then you start planning all this stuff, and then you realize, oh, I got invited to a thing.
Oh, yes.
Or I met a person and we wanted to go have lunch together, or some other thing happened, and like the plan goes out the window. But that's all part of the ride.
And that schedule comes out about a week before the convention. I'm the type that goes through with my highlighter. I have an Excel spreadsheet. And again, the event comes, I make maybe 20% of the different events I'm planning to get to. It's just there's so much happening in such a brief period of time.
I often have this experience, and I'll hit you with it, and you can tell me if you have the same experience or not. But when I first started going, I spent a lot of time at the marquee events, the main actors in sort of the main theater. And as I've been going back to conventions, I sort of go to the like smaller theater stuff. And I find it like more offbeat, off the wall, and sometimes far more entertaining. Because like, I don't know how many times you can see, and I'm going to pick somebody at random. I don't know how many times you can see William Shatner. I don't know how many times you can see Gates McFadden. It doesn't mean we don't love them, but it's like we've heard all the stories.
Exactly.
We've heard all the questions.
And I still call it STLV, but the event in 2021, the 55-year mission tour, one of the highlights of that event was listening to Anthony Montgomery do a Mystery Science Theater 3000 type commentary for Galaxy Quest. And, that's not even a Star Trek film. And it was so much fun. And that was one of the highlight of the event. So, I think getting out of that main theater, seeing what else there is to do. But I'm still one of those. If George Takei's on stage, I'm in that theater. I love hearing these stories, even if they're over and over. And, I'll watch every time I can see All Good Things. I'm going to watch it. So anytime I can see these guys talk, I'm there. I'm always in that main theater.
I love it. I love it. I will tell you, one of the ones I really enjoyed at the last one was in the what do they call the little theater where the cafeteria is? It wasn't the CVS theater anymore. It was the Roddenberry Theater.
I think so. Yeah.
They changed the name of it. Yeah, they keep changing the name of it. But anyway, the one I'm talking about, right? And they had a guy who is a weapons expert, and he gave a talk on the anthropology and development of Klingon bladed weapons.
Love that.
And like why is the bat'leth shaped like this, and like why don't they use bows and arrows or like any kind of throwing weapons, and what this means about Klingon society. And he gave this incredibly entertaining lecture that was about 45 minutes with like different iterations of bat'leths he was showing on his slides, and talking about like what, obviously they were in close range only weapons. And so they were probably in these lava caves. So they were probably underground for a lot of their history. And I was like, whoa, this is amazing. And it was all like, just fan stuff, but I just love that kind of stuff, because I was like, this is not the kind of thing, that you run across, in your like virtual convention experiences. It's all about, the guests and celebrities. But when you come to these live events, they have the room to do these like nutty things. And I just love it.
Absolutely. And that's the greatest part is like, I look at podcasts as a kind of a simile to this, and that I'll listen to your podcast. Trek Ranks is another one I'm kind of obsessed with. He just did an episode, or it's an older one, the top 5 scenes in a turbo lift. Mm-hmm. You have to be a pretty diehard fan to listen to a 2-hour podcast that's talking about your top 5 scenes in a turbo lift. And at a convention, you'll have something like that where we're talking about Klingon weapons. There's 200 people in the theater with you, and in the next theater over, you've got the main cast from The Next Generation. But you've still got 200 people that are so interested in this really niche fandom thing, and that's Star Trek fandom at its absolute finest, that there are just so many diverse views to look at this community and say, what can I learn? What can we see?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Yes. We love Trek Ranks over here, and we send in our lists whenever we have them. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about collections. I can see behind you, you have your autographs on cards. You mentioned collecting action figures. What else do you collect?
So I don't even consider myself to be a collector of autographs. These just kind of happened. The couple of conventions I went to, I either had friends that gave me tickets, or I've had a few that I really wanted to get. At the conventions, my big focus is photo ops. I love getting a picture with all of these folks that were on the screen that portrayed these characters. Probably my absolute favorite ones are the ones where they're in character. So I got Casey Biggs when he was in makeup as Damar, Chase Masterson as Lita. Those are absolutely incredible because you look at those pictures and, these aren't real people. Damar's not really the leader of the Cardassian Empire, but my gosh, that's as close as you're going to get to actually being there. Beyond that, when I was a kid, I didn't collect the action figures. I played with them, ripped them all out of the boxes as soon as I could. I'm so excited for Playmates.
The right move.
Yeah, they're not going to give me any fun in a box. Even I mentioned my first convention, Barbara March. I got her to sign the character, the Playmates action figure. Just the plastic figure. No idea where the box went. And I'm really excited for Playmates to come back out with those. I don't know. In the past, I've moved a lot in the last 2 years. We started with an apartment where I had my very own Star Trek room to living in a 2-bedroom suite at this hotel I was running. So my collection really shrank down, and now I have the opportunity to expand it a little bit more. So the Eagle Moss ships, I love those. I've got a collection of core ones that I won't let go. Probably
the small or the big?
I started with the small, now I'm at the big ones.
Okay.
And probably the only thing I collect 100% is anything I can find of Quark, who is absolutely my favorite character. Anything signed by Armin Shimmerman, I'm going to be there. But yeah, my convention is very eclectic.
I can see Quark overlooking you right over your shoulder right now. So he's watching and blessing your appearance on Trek Profiles.
My latest thing too, especially having lived in a smaller place where these uniform cards that Rittenhouse sells, they're the relic cards, have a little piece of the screen used uniform. I would love to be one of those people who can spend tens of thousands of dollars and get screen used props, but that's not in the budget and I don't have the space for it. So they have these little trading cards that have a little just swatch of the uniform on it. And I think that is such a great thing to collect. And then my current drive is getting all the autograph cards from Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but I'm not one of those. They have to come from the same line. I've got some that I've had signed myself. They're from different collections, but it's such a big cast. Like I said, Deep Space Nine is my favorite series. I want to get the whole cast to autograph different cards and just be able to put those on display.
So what item in your collection gives you the most joy?
So I was able to get about 4 years ago at a really, really good price an Avery Brooks autograph card.
Oh.
And that was the first autograph card I got. He was, until Pike, my absolute favorite captain. And unfortunately, he does not do the conventions anymore, which just kills me because I'd love to get that photo op. So getting that was really a big win for me.
One of the things I would always be concerned about when buying things like that is the subject of authenticity. So how do you know it's an authentic signature?
So with a lot of these,
I don't know the answer to this. I'm not even sure how you do it.
No, that's a good question. There's different Facebook groups, and I found a guy on eBay that was selling some cards that had been signed in person, and those I posted to the group and was like, does everybody think these look authentic? But most of these cards, especially the ones from Rittenhouse, they're authentic because they're signed. They don't come with a certificate of authenticity, but they're sold from Rittenhouse, and that they were part of that collection.
Okay.
So that it's a legitimate company, that they've been around for a while. They've got a license, and you see pictures of them signing it. So are they all 100%? Hopefully. If not, I don't know any different.
I get you. Yeah, it's just something I always wonder about, right? I mean, you never know. I used to have a collecting habit, not of Star Trek, but of something else. And I always was on the lookout for that. So it's just something I felt like I wanted to ask about.
I always take comfort knowing I'm getting those ones that were in the different collections they release versus the ones that were signed at a convention with no authenticity at all.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to the Star Trek cruise as we record this in a couple weeks. And they just announced a photo op with Terry Farrell in the TOS uniform from Trials and Tribulations.
Oh, cool.
So I'm thinking, do I want that photo op? Yes.
Yes.
Am I going to?
That's the right answer.
I don't know. I don't know. Well, you know what? It's funny because I'm not. I actually have paid for photo ops. And I've not done a lot of autographs. In fact, I don't think I've done any. I could be wrong about that. But the reason that I will do photo ops is not actually because I want the photo op. It's because I want to support the actor directly. And I feel like I enjoy them so much, and I respect the work that they did so much that I just want to buy something from them. But I will tell you, the photo ops that I've done, I don't like do anything with those photos. Like literally they're sitting on my camera roll and I never look at them, and I don't tweet them or like hang them up or show them to people.
Yeah.
For me, but I buy them because I wanted to buy something directly from them, just to show my appreciation. And I don't know if that counts as a good enough reason, but that's why I do it.
There's no such thing as a bad reason to get a photo op.
Right on. So you'd mentioned the fact that your husband is not a huge Trek fan. Is that right?
He is not. He's very supportive of me. We will watch the new Star Trek shows together. Discovery he loves. He didn't really watch Prodigy. Lower Decks we'll watch together, but he has absorbed enough of it through peripherally that he'll make jokes about Ferengi, and I mean, he gets it. He's been very supportive. But I always joke that for at least 1 week a year when I'm at a convention, he's going to be a Star Trek widow. I'll answer the phone, but I'm totally out of commission for that week. Last season, we actually opened a coffee shop in Maine for our very first season. And one of the conditions going into it's a seasonal business. We're only open May through October. August, I'm going to STLV that first year. And he was supportive. He has a full-time job. He's an accountant, and he covered the shop for us that 1 week. I was like, I'll be there. We'll make it happen. I'm not going this year. It was not easy for him. But yeah, he's very supportive of the fandom.
So yeah, I'm always curious about how these mixed marriages work, right? Because I'm in one of those where my spouse has like no interest in any of this stuff, and so she just like tolerates it, So do you travel together to the conventions? So when you're not running the business?
We do not. I've traveled a little bit. I've gone to 3 STLVs. I've gone to Ticonderoga to see the set tour. And he generally stays back and takes care of the dog and watches the house while I'm gone. We've got a great marriage. We don't travel all that much together. We went to Vegas this fall for the very first time together on a non-Star Trek trip. Had a blast. But yeah, when it comes to the Star Trek, I've always kind of held that close to the vest. And that's something I do solitarily. I tend to watch the episodes by myself for the first time. It really wasn't until I went to that first convention that I had anyone related to Star Trek that I could share the stuff with.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's glorious. So have you ever done a cosplay at all? Star Trek uniform, anything like that? Or
kind of. So my first convention in 96, I had a Next Generation costume. And, I'm a bigger guy. In 96, I was a bigger kid. So my mother had to sew extension sleeves onto the sleeves because they were too short. I had cardboard Vulcan ears.
Nice.
And since then, I had a Picard costume that I wore in 2019 or 2020. Yeah, 2019. But other than that, not really. I'm not creative enough. I don't have the time to invest in it. And some of these guys, their cosplays are incredible.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you go to the costume contest each year, and they look like they've walked right off the show, and there's no way I can compete with that. So I'm happy just to sit back and watch them and let them take all the credit for it.
I remember one year this guy came as a full-on Tholian, like a TOS Tholian. Right? I don't know if you ever saw the pictures of that, but I mean, like the guy could barely move.
Oh, it's crazy.
And, he has like people around him to help him navigate as he was like getting onto stage. It was just ridiculous.
And there was a guy that went a few years in the Pike chair.
Yes.
Which, again, kind of a simple cosplay, and that makeup wise, there's not a lot involved, but he built this wheelchair. And as you're looking at that, you're in Las Vegas. It's 120 degrees outside. You can't move your hands. You can't scratch your face. He was completely confined in this thing. That takes a lot of dedication. And I'm a fan, but man, that is not, if you're going to gatekeep and define a fan as somebody who can do a cosplay, I am not that guy.
Yeah, it's fair enough. Enough. Yeah, I can only do it. I mean, I've done a couple of things, but I can only bear being in a costume for a short period of time. I mean, after like a couple of hours, I am done, and I just want to be, comfortable.
Yep, put me in a t-shirt and shorts, and I'm comfortable. If we can find a cosplay that looks in those guidelines, I'm there.
Exactly right. So I understand that you admin a Facebook group for Star Trek fans. Tell us a little bit about that.
I do, yeah. So when I first discovered really STLV through the Shore Leave podcast, I discovered their companion Facebook group, which is right now called Unofficial Star Trek Conventions. And we kind of went through a rebranding when STLV no longer was STLV and decided to incorporate all the different Star Trek conventions. But I was asked to join them in 2020, I think it was. It's a group that's been around for a while. Marina Kravchuk, Heather Barker, Jesse Okender are the other admins. And it's really an incredible place if you want to get to the conventions to learn what's happening. And more than that, it's a very
valuable resource.
It is, and it's a very positive place to explore Star Trek. Twitter, there's a lot of gatekeeping. There's a lot of, at times, negativity, and we really block as much of that out as we possibly can through the Facebook group and keep it a very positive place to interact, which over the last 2 years with COVID hasn't been the easiest thing to accomplish. There was a lot of concern over 2020 if the convention would happen. It ended up not happening. They postponed it to December, and then it was canceled. So keeping information coming in a positive way for something that really isn't all that positive. We've seen Mission Chicago. There have been a lot of delays in getting information out. So trying to keep that a happy place that people can just have that sense of community has been really important and something I've absolutely been a huge fan of.
So you're a Star Trek fan. You love Star Trek. You want to talk about Star Trek, and you get into a Facebook group, and now you're an admin. And I imagine that only like the unpleasant stuff comes to your attention as an admin, right? Because if everybody's having a great time and enjoying themselves, like admins are never getting involved in that, right? So
yeah.
Talk a little bit about how you manage sort of the negative aspects of managing a Facebook group with your love of Star Trek at the same time.
So surprisingly, our group really hasn't had a lot of negativity that's come to our attention. It's more we try to identify those posts that might cause a problem down the road. But we've been very fortunate. We have not had anyone come in there that's adamantly, this sucks. This is the worst thing that's ever happened to Star Trek. We haven't had a lot of that. It's more making sure that whatever gets posted isn't there to cause drama and cause contention between members. And an example, I posted the other day, right now we're about 54 days until Mission Chicago. And Reed Pop, we'll see how the event goes. They haven't been really generous in details. So they announced that George Takei was going to be there. So I posted to the group, hey, exciting news. And there were a few comments that, well, your definition of exciting is a little bit different than ours. And we don't necessarily take those away, but it's watching what is the response to that. Does somebody come out and say, this event's going to suck? Let's delete that. We want to keep it upbeat and happy and focus on the positive, even when necessarily there might not be a lot of positivity at the moment. Let's fake it until we get there, because the event's going to happen whether or not we're positive or negative. So let's just embrace it and have fun with it.
So as we sit here, are you sure that the event's going to happen? Because some people were taking it as like, oh, they're not releasing things because it's up in the air. So I have no knowledge. I'm just asking what your thought is.
It's funny. I think 2 weeks ago, I was starting to think it's not going to happen. There was no information. They hadn't made a guest announcement since September. But since then, we've had a couple more guest announcements. Robin Curtis is coming. George Takei is going to be there. They've started selling tickets to autographs and photo ops. I take that as a good sign. I'm still holding out hope that we're going to get some huge cast announcement. The Reed Pop now has the license, the creation lost, and I think we're going to see a focus on the new Star Trek shows. So if we don't have full cast representation from Discovery, Lower Decks, Prodigy, Strange New Worlds, which comes out I think a few weeks right after the convention, I'll be shocked. It's going to be a missed opportunity from CBS because they have Star Trek fans paying a lot of money to come to this event, and all we want to do is talk about these shows. So it creates really good, upbeat, positive social media, and it's a great opportunity for them to promote the product. So I still am holding a hope we're going to see a lot of good stuff coming from this convention. I think what we're seeing with STLV 2021, there were a lot of last minute cancellations because of COVID, because of the world in general. So I think Reed Pop is trying to, and this is all, I have no insight at all. This is all just my gut theory. They're holding off on a lot of announcements to make sure that doesn't happen, that we don't see a lot of cancellations.
Right on. I think we're of a similar mind about where I am at with the Star Trek cruise, which is I was like, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And I wanted to do costumes because they have costume parties every night. And I put it off and I was like, I'm not going to buy anything. I'm not going to do anything. And then it got to be like 30 days away. And I'm like, it looks like it's going to happen. Like 30 days is pretty close for a cruise. Like it's pretty close, And so I was like, well, maybe I better start thinking about this. And finally I was like, all right, got to pull the ripcord, we got to do it. So So I think it's time to talk about some episodes. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So I think we should start at the beginning. Let's talk about Voyager Season 1, Episode 1, Caretaker. Now, this is an episode that the M5 told me is particularly noteworthy for you, and I want to know why.
So when you look at all the premieres for the different series, I think Caretaker does such a good job in setting up the future of that show. And Voyager needed more explanation than I think any of the other series. Maybe Deep Space Nine was up there. But Next Generation, yeah, we're going to explore. TOS, we're going to explore. Voyager really had to set up, we've got these two different crews. We're going to strand these people on the other side of the galaxy. How do we figure this out in an episode? And they did it in a two-parter that made perfect sense and I think was really a great episode. Janeway being put in the position of, do we help the Ocampa? Do we stop the Caretaker? Do we destroy them? Do I focus on my own crew and just take them home right away? What she very well could have done, and I think a lot of us in that situation may have done that, may have said, you know what? The Ocampa can handle themselves. I'm out of here. Take me home. And she didn't do that. She saw the greater need to protect that society and say, you know what? We're going to protect them even if it strands my crew 70,000 light years from home. It might take us 70 years to get back, but I'm going to do the right thing.
I will say I finished a Voyager watch through not too long ago. And one of the things I felt about Caretaker is that it wrote a check that the series didn't really cash, I think, in a way. That I think that there would have been a lot of lingering stuff left over from that decision that I felt like never got the due that it should have gotten. And having said that, I love Voyager, and I think the cast is amazing, and I think there's some of the best Star Trek of all is in Voyager, right? I think it's just an amazing series. But I feel like the setup just never quite got played out, I think, in the way that I think it would have. I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, I agree. I love Voyager. I love all Star Trek, and I'm not saying any of it's bad ever, but I live by the saying that even bad Trek is good Trek. And, Voyager had, on paper for the first couple episodes, Voyager had such potential. We've got a great story. We're stranding these people so far away. We're integrating this Maquis crew, and that's something, and Voyager gets slack for this, and I'm one of those that'll agree. They never explored that. In the second episode, all of the Maquis crew, all of them are in uniform, blending in perfectly with their Starfleet counterparts. And we see so few cases where there's tension that arises from that. And these are folks that turn their backs on Starfleet to defend their homes from the Cardassians. To see no resentment from that is such a lost opportunity. The only one that really brings that back is Seska. And thank goodness for Seska, because she really represents what that should look like. But yeah, Voyager, great possibility, great story, but they missed a lot of opportunities in that first season.
Yeah, they didn't pick up those threads. I mean, they had a little bit with like the who's going to be the chief engineer stuff for the first couple episodes. And then they had like the Tuvok boot camp episode where he's going to sort out some of these Maquis and bring them up to Starfleet standards and stuff like that. But I don't know, I felt like they just weren't interested in that thread after a certain point, and they wanted to tell different stories, and that's my kindly interpretation of it.
It seems like that would have been a big selling point for the series, and that we're going to differentiate this from the other series that came before it by having this tension, something that we never would have seen in the Next Generation. You'll never see some random lieutenant from engineering come up and yell at Picard and say, you're making the wrong move. But that's something we very well could have seen from Voyager, and it would have added an interesting layer of complexion to those stories that we just unfortunately never got.
One of the things that I've been dealing with myself as they're making more Star Trek in the modern era is that the things that we're seeing now in a lot of ways sort of rewrite the things that we see earlier in the show. So let me just give you one example of this. And because I want to bring it back to Voyager in just a second, which is that if you're a new viewer to Star Trek, so you don't know anything except for the new shows, and let's say you watch the Picard series straight through, and you're like, oh, so there's these guys called the Romulans. We said we were going to help them in the Federation, and then we told them to get lost. Then you go back and you start watching the old Star Trek, and then you come across an episode like In the Pale Moonlight, and you're like, oh, so we killed their ambassador, we drag them into a war, they all, a bunch of them die, and then we basically tell their race to go get stuffed. Like, we're bad people. The Federation does the Romulans really bad. Especially if you start with Picard and then go back, it's not a good look. And so that's just an example, though, of like the newer Trek is sort of informing how you might reinterpret some of the older Trek, right? They're now revisiting Janeway and Chakotay, like the JC shippers have their own thing going on here and what they want to see. I'm curious how you feel about this.
I don't know.
Not necessarily the JC thing in particular, but if you want to talk about that, you can. But just this whole revisionist concept.
The JC shippers, I'll deal with those first. And it's interesting. I would much rather see Janeway Chakotay than 7 of 9 in Chakotay. We talked about being stuck so far from home, living on this ship with the same 200 people day in and day out. There's going to be those romantic inclinations. I don't know. I'm anxious to see where they take it. As for the rewriting of history, I don't know. I look at United States history, I look at our relationship with England, and we were at war with them for our independence. Great big middle finger to the King of England at that time, but right now they're one of our closest allies. I think it shows that relationships change, they merge, they develop. I don't know. One of the things I have with Star Trek too is I look at it and recognize wholeheartedly it's a TV show. The stories are going to change. A lot of folks get stuck on canon, and I absolutely hate that term because it's all fictional. It's all, and I think Star Trek does such a good job. When you look back to when the show first came out, a lot of those shows hold up today. Almost 60 years later, there was no expectation when that show came out that 60 years later, people would still be talking about it, that we'd still be basing stories based off of those original stories. So the fact that they hold up as well as they do, I think says a lot for the show, but it's not reality. So I take it as it's a good story. As long as it's a good story, I'm happy with it.
Okay, yeah, I get you. And I think this was really brought to mind because I was having an engagement with someone on Twitter, and we were DMing about Star Trek, of course, which is like 98% of what I do on there. And we were talking about the collective screaming that we heard in our heads as we were watching season 1 of Picard. And there were all these people like, well, why is Picard not living with his wife, Beverly Crusher? Where's where's his wife, Beverly? Like, what? So she's obviously like hiding in the back room while the series is going on because they're obviously married and living happily ever after, right? And, there's people that have sort of been sitting with that in their head for 20 years. And then they see the show and they're like, wait a minute, this is not what I signed up for, And I get it. People don't like that.
And we had that big absence between the end of Enterprise and this premiere of Discovery where the novels were huge. And I've listened to a few of them on audiobook. I've read a couple, but they generally have their own universe associated with them. So it's easy to go down that rabbit hole and say, well, this is the story. This is the official story. But going back to the fact it's a TV show, I watched a YouTube video. It's like a 45-minute video explaining why Voyager didn't go for the Gamma Quadrant wormhole rather than plot a direct course to Earth, because the Beta Quadrant wormhole was closer than Earth. 45 minutes looking into it, they had a decent backstory as to why that might work. But at the end of the day, it's a TV show. And it's a better story to have them plotting a course for home. I think that's something that we as fans need to step back and say, okay, this is all fiction and it is fun. But there will be points where it doesn't make any sense at all. Lower Decks did a really good job with that with Shax when they brought him back from the dead.
Yeah.
What happened? Well, we don't know. Yeah, exactly. I think it's
you don't want to know.
It's fun, and it's just rolling an eye and saying, okay, you know what? The stories are good. Let's just go with it.
Right on. So since we brought it up, let's talk about that. Actually, let's talk about Remembrance. That's the show premiere of Star Trek Picard. That's also on the list. So I want to know your take about this one, Ron.
So like I said, I grew up watching Next Generation. My first Star Trek recollection is Next Generation. So being in the audience at STLV in 2018 or 2019 when Patrick Stewart came on stage and said Picard's coming back, we had all heard the rumors, but nobody thought that was actually going to happen. And the minute he stepped on stage, you knew what was coming. So that expectation of, oh my God, we're getting Captain Picard back, Patrick Stewart, it's huge. As far as Trek fans go, that's the biggest news you could possibly get. Remembrance came on and my jaw kind of dropped through the show because it was a fantastic story. But it was not the Picard that we were used to or expected. I'm looking for
which is what Patrick said.
Absolutely.
It's not the Picard that you remember, but people did not give that any credence, right?
They didn't. And
I don't think people really believed it.
And my first watch of that episode was, what is this? This is horrible. This isn't Captain Picard. And then being a Trek fan, I watched it a dozen times and said, okay, I get it. This is a new complexity, a new layer of Captain Picard. And it's that show coming back, I think, changed the franchise. It really set the tone for the new Star Trek and said, we're going to be more serious. We're going to look at this from a different lens. And I am absolutely here for it. I absolutely love that show. Remembrance Now is one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek, simply because we get to see actual growth from this character, something that we never would have seen in Next Generation. You look at the Inner Light, where he lives an entire lifespan in a different reality. In the next episode, it's life back to normal. I think seeing the growth from him, it's something else. Seeing that Romulan incident, and we're going to talk about one of the novels that ties into Remembrance that I think really also helped change my viewpoint on the series as a whole.
All right, let's talk about that in a second. But I think that one of the things that happens in an episode like this is it's analogous to that experience you have, and maybe you had this experience as a kid, Ron, where you're in, and I'm thinking about elementary school, where you're just sort of dealing with your teachers in school. And then one day you see your teacher in the supermarket and you're like, what is that person doing here? Like, how do they exist outside of the school building, right? Like, it's not normal, right? That your teacher would be in the supermarket, and then they see your parents and you stop and you chat, and it's weird, right? Because you're used to them just being in that context. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things about TNG in particular is that Captain Picard, his whole identity, which is a big part of the show, is wrapped up in being the captain of the ship. And this idea that, well, now you're going to see JLP stripped from that, right? Outside of the ship, outside of the captaincy, outside of Starfleet. Who's that guy?
Exactly.
And it's a guy we've never seen before, right? It's a completely different guy. And living with sort of all the stuff that happened in, which one is it where we find out it's Generations, where we find out that Wrobel and Renee are dead, right? So he's now inherited sort of the winery and having this completely different experience going on. And I think just setting that up was very fascinating for me. I actually really enjoyed that. Plus, too, for me, we had a viewing party at my house with like some of the most amazing Trek people, so that also made me really happy. So I have positive and warm memories of that. Yeah, so it was really good. It was really good. But you brought up a novel, so let's talk about the novel. Let's talk about The Last Best Hope by Una McCormack. You specifically wanted to talk about this. I read the book, so there's a lot of great stuff in it. I'd highly recommend it, but I want to know why. What about it changed your opinion of the show?
I struggled with Remembrance in that what happened to Picard? How did he go from being the captain of the flagship, being the ideal captain, to an old man who's retired running a winery? What happened? And that's what this book really did. It explained in much greater detail. And we saw pieces of this in Children of Mars, the short trek. There was a comic book that came out that kind of talked about it. But the novel really explained what happened to Romulus, what happened to Picard's relationship with the Romulans. His backstory with Raffi a little bit is better explained. And I found this to be absolutely the perfect bridge piece between All Good Things and Remembrance, and that it really lays out what's happening in this show. I listened to the audio version narrated by Robert Petkoff. He does an awesome job doing the voices of the characters. And we see LaForge kind of being that point of contact at Utopia Planitia when it happens. And it just gave such great backstory. And I didn't listen to the book until after the first season. I listened to the audiobook, then rewatched the first season. Whole new appreciation for that whole series. It makes so much more sense. And the books aren't considered canon, which is a term I hate to use, but this book really fits perfectly in that timeline and should almost be a movie between those two shows to explain what's happening, because it did a great job of setting up the series.
If I remember right, the book came out almost at the same time that the show went on the air. I mean, it was very, very close. I think like maybe the first episode or two might have aired before the book came out.
I think so, yeah.
And I remembered reading the book and saying like, I don't think you can watch those episodes anymore without having read this book, because they really do inform in a very intelligent way so much of what's going on, and giving you the backstory of not just Raffi's experience with Picard, but her own experience as a person. And you get to see like why she's so broken, really. at the beginning of the show. And also for any Romulan fans out there, so much Romulan stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So much.
And as someone who's not the biggest Romulan fan, it puts their whole situation into so much more perspective. You understand why Picard has turned his back on the Federation to a point. You understand it opens up so many different viewpoints to that series. Yeah, definitely recommend that book to anyone who hasn't read it.
Yeah, I loved like the little insights into Romulan culture and psychology, like why they're so obsessed with privacy. And I'll give you a fan theory on this. You could react to it or not. It's up to you. But my feeling is that if you were to go back to like the Sundering when they left Neo planet Vulcan, I think part of it might have been something to do with telepathy. And that like the Romulans are like, telepathy is terrible. We don't want any of that, and like we don't want anybody inside our minds. I think that might have been part of the Sundering, was something along those lines, because like why would this culture be so obsessed with privacy, right? They were obsessed, with like, this isn't my front door, this isn't my name, like you don't tell anybody your real name, and like everything has to be private.
Yeah.
They don't want to share anything with anybody anywhere. They're paranoid about anybody knowing anything about them. And this isn't externally, this is internally among their own culture between other Romulans. They don't share anything or say anything or tell anybody anything about themselves. It's like this entirely closed off sort of culture. And I think like, I'm cogitating on that. Like, is that really what it's about? Like there's some kind of anti-telepathy kind of thing going on there with the Romulans. And that's why they didn't want to hang with a lot of the Vulcans, who seem to have a lot more prevalence of telepathy than among the Romulans. But I don't know. That's just my thought. I don't know if you want to have a take on that.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's an I've never thought about that. I think it's an interesting viewpoint, and it makes me go back to the episode, and I'm so bad with episode names, where the Romulans kidnap Deanna Troi and turn her into a Romulan. Being half beta, that she has these insights, and that's an interesting perspective. I like that. I think that would make sense. Well, and that's one thing I love about Star Trek, is that almost 60 years of content, countless books, comic books, we're still able to look at this and come up with a theory that would make perfect sense. There's so many opportunities as fans to go in and say, well, this is how I think it should work, and have it work. I think that's great.
All right. Well, I'm not one for normally trying to figure this stuff out, but as I was reading the book, it's something that just occurred to me. So I thought I'd ask you about that. All right, let's talk about some Deep Space Nine. Now, I have to say, for someone who's a huge Deep Space Nine fan, it seems that there's not a lot of Deep Space Nine on the list. So let's talk about one of those. And certainly, I think, an unusual pick. Season 7, Episode 15, Bada Bing, Bada Bang, the 1950s Las Vegas retro episode. This one is certainly quite memorable, but I'm curious what makes it memorable for you.
So this is one of those episodes I'll watch every time on a trip to Las Vegas. Doesn't matter if I'm going for Star Trek or just to hang out in the city. And first off, you are so lucky to live in that city. I am so jealous. I love Las Vegas. It's my happy place. I spent about 15 years working in Orlando in the tourism industry, and said Vegas is the adult Disneyland. I hate kids.
People here say that.
Not a fan of kids, and you get to Vegas, and it's everything Disney World is without the children. But this episode is fun. One of the things I love about Deep Space Nine is the huge cast. I mentioned earlier that I'm trying to get autograph cards from what I consider to be the main cast. And when you look beyond the starring characters and you look at that secondary cast, the Litas, the Roms, there are so many people in this show, and there's such a sense of community on that space station. And this episode really showcases that. It's not the end of the world. If our hero characters fail in their mission, we lose a holodeck character who's a great character. I love Vic Fontaine, but it's not, no one's going to die. The space station isn't going to get kidnapped. The Alpha Quadrant's not at stake. They're there having fun, and they're able to let their hair down, take their badges off. And it is just such a fun episode showing these characters and the relationships that they have with each other interact, and it gets them out of their element. I don't know, any chance we can use the holodeck, I'm there for it.
I'd agree with you in that I live here, and I have this insane sort of indescribable love for this nutcase city. It's just the most bizarre place to live and to have a family, and I'm raising my kid here, which is also very weird. And I just have an insane love for the place. And so seeing it in Star Trek like that makes me so happy. And even though, of course, it's a little bit retro and it's a little bit sanitized, but I just loved it. So it's a fantastic episode that I enjoy. And Vic Fontaine, by the way, is probably one of my top two Deep Space Nine characters. My top two are Quark and Vic Fontaine. I am less interested, and I don't know why this is, but I'm always less interested in all the human characters, because in Enterprise, I'm all about T'Pol and Phlox, and in Deep Space Nine, Vic Fontaine and Quark are my favorites, and Ezri is my favorite Dex. So there you go. I don't know what that says about me, but there you go.
It's interesting, too. You mentioned kind of the whitewashing of history, and I think in a holodeck situation, we look at how we observe history now. And like I said, I worked at Disney for a long time. I was a big Disney fan growing up as well. And you look at like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, that movie depicts a point in history in a very different way than the reality of that time was. And I can see that through the lens of Deep Space Nine, and that if I'm 200 years in the future, 300 years in the future, I'm creating a holodeck program that represents the past, I'm going to clean it up. I'm going to make it 100% fiction, based very loosely on reality. And we see that scene where Captain Sisko and Cassidy are talking about how it was for Black people back in that time period, and that's not what Vix is. It is very much a reimagined, this is how it should have been, this is how it could have been.
All right, let's move on then. I've got to ask you about this one. I think it's actually the first time that it came up on Trek Profiles actually as a main episode to talk about. So I'm excited to hear you talk about this one. It's TNG Season 6, Episode 7, Rascals.
So
yes, go ahead. Just take it, Ron. Go.
So my guess is when I sent you my list of episodes, there were a few on there that people don't necessarily consider to be the best of Star Trek. And this one would probably go right up there. I love it. I am going to defend some of what people would consider to be the worst episodes of Star Trek. And I will die on this mountain. I love these shows. So Rascals is one of the first episodes I do remember watching as a child. And at that point in my life, I was about the same age as our crew when they reverted back to these young ages. And I remember looking at this and being like, that is so cool. As a 12-year-old, Picard can still be captain. I could totally do that. And I think, it's a fun episode. The science, it might not be there. The Ferengi are kind of awkward in this episode. But it's a fun episode. If you watch it without any preconceptions, it is just fun all around. Getting to see Alexander interact with the crew. Yeah, it's a fun episode. I'm going to say that over and over again.
So, well, I think it's certainly one of the top 5 moments in all of Season 7 is Baby Guinan and Baby Ro jumping up and down on the bed. And if you disagree, we shan't be friends.
Right?
Sorry.
You can at me on Facebook. It's
fine. All right. Well, then let's talk about something in a similar vein. Let's talk about TNG Season 7, Episode 14, Sub Rosa.
Yep.
You wanted to talk about this one, Ron.
I did. Along the same lines. I
gotta know what's up.
Same lines. It is not maybe what's considered the best episode of Next Generation. It's fun. And we get to see Gates McFadden. Dr. Crusher is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated characters of that series. You put yourself back in the 90s when this show was produced. Technical effects weren't the greatest. She has an intimate moment, we can say, with the ghost, Shakar.
Oh, yeah.
And it works. I mean, her acting in this episode is absolutely incredible. She comes across 100% as she's in love with this ghost. It's out of character for her, but she's also under the influence of this ghost. Dr. Crusher is not going to walk off the Enterprise and just leave the ship. But when she's being influenced unduly by this ghost, it could happen. And I mean, it's, again, not critically the best episode. It's not the highest level science fiction episode, but it's just fun to watch. Going back to Scotland type era, it's just, I don't know. I love this episode so much. I love Dr. Crusher. I love Gates McFadden. And I think this is absolutely must-see viewing for just feel-good Star Trek.
Do you want to hit me up with a "Dinna Light the Candle"?
Right.
Your best
"Dinna Light the Candle."
There we go. Fantastic. From now on, I think that's going to be a rule on Trek profiles. Anytime anybody brings up Sub Rosa, you have to say, "Didn't I light the candle?" in your worst imitation of that guy from the beginning of the show.
As I say, when I look at my fandom, some of the critically acclaimed episodes, Chain of Command is a good example. Great episode that really delves into Picard, but it's a heavy episode.
Oh yeah.
And typically when I'm watching Star Trek, it's on in the background. It's something that I think I said earlier, I'm working, I'm doing something on the computer, but it's there in the background. An episode like Chain of Command, The Siege of AR 5857, whatever, in Deep Space Nine, those are heavy episodes to watch and aren't necessarily the kind of thing that I want to have on in the background. I'm looking for that feel good, that light, fluffy, if I look up, I can smile for a moment type episode. And that's what Sub Rosa, Rascals, what a lot of those episodes can do.
Okay, well then let's talk about another one, I think, in that vein. And I don't know if we want to say a lot about it, but I'll certainly ask you. And that's Deep Space Nine, Season 1, Episode 10, Move Along Home. So take us back to the first shap, Ron, and tell me what's going on here.
So this episode, I don't understand the hatred for this episode. I love this episode. I think it's good science fiction. I think it takes our characters in the first season, puts them in a situation that is so foreign to us. We're watching this whole episode the first time thinking our characters, their lives are at risk here. What's going to happen? And at the end, blink, it's nothing. It's all a game. I think that is a fantastic story for Deep Space Nine. I think if you took that story and put Picard, Riker, and Data, it works. You put Spock, Kirk, and McCoy, it works. I think that episode is so Star Trek. And it gets such a bad reputation, and it's, there's a little bit of singing, Alan Moraine. Okay, it's fun, though. It's fun, and it's good science fiction.
I don't think there's any... I have always said I think Move Along Home is a perfectly good episode of Star Trek. I don't have any criticisms of it. I do think you bring up something which we've talked about on the show before, which is that oftentimes in Star Trek, we meet aliens who actually aren't all that alien. They're just space explorers like us, and we come across, they might have like different noses and a couple of other things, but they're basically like us. I'm always reminded of this story that I've talked about on the show before, and that's the original Solaris story. There was a movie with George Clooney that they made, which is very distantly related to the book. The book is a much richer meal and has a lot more in it. But one of the things that's in that book, I don't know if you've ever read it, but one of the concepts in this sci-fi book is that there's this planet that has like a sentience on it. That's really the only way I can describe it. And we send people out there to study the planet. And one of the key fundamental things is that the sentience on the planet is doing some very strange stuff. And one of the questions that the humans are always asking is, like, what does it want? And the very idea of it and wanting are human concepts. Like, it is an alien creature that has alien understanding, and you can't even begin to understand what it wants. Those are the only terms we have are human terms. And this alien sentience on this planet is essentially unknowable. And it's interacting with the characters that are in the story, doing some really whack stuff. And you're like, why is it doing that? There's no answer to that question that you can ask that's going to make sense. And I love just seeing these aliens who are like, no, we don't want to like sit and have like a cultural exchange. We want to play games. Like, It was a great example of that, right?
Exactly.
That's how they relate, And
I think Star Trek does a good job. Well, it does a job in that the aliens that we meet all have one defining characteristic that differentiates them from humanity. The Klingons, it's war. The Vulcans, it's logic. The Ferengi, it's profit. The Bajorans, it's religion. And that defines every character that we meet that's in that species. And I think in reality, if we were to meet aliens, like you said, they might be so different that for them, it's just a whole different way of processing information. And they're not driven by those concepts that we even fully understand. You might meet a species that for them, the concept of travel is so foreign. They have arms and legs, but for them, they stay stationary in one space. And we see that a little bit. The
Cytherians. We met those aliens.
Right?
The Cytherians, right?
And I think we do. We see in Voyager, there's the ones where they can transport back and forth. I forget the name of the species, but they could get them back to Earth quicker. And the idea is they're all about...
Is that the Sicarians?
The Sicarians, yeah. They come back in Picardo.
Yeah, not at all pleasurable.
No, I mean, it's all about pleasure. So they're all very two-dimension, but we don't see that evolution, and that you might meet a species that the idea of material wealth is completely foreign. Why own anything? And it's... I don't know. I think you see a little bit of that in Move Along Home, and that they just seem very two-dimensional. It's all about pleasure. But at the end, yeah, let's have this grand adventure, put our characters' lives at stake. It's just a game. I don't know. I love this episode.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too. I really enjoyed it. And the one thing I was going to say before was I was talking to my kid about our dog, and we were putting out the food, and he was commenting about how bad the dog food smells. And I said, you realize that the dog has a completely different nose than you and I do, and this smells delicious to him.
Exactly.
Right? And we're all here in the same space at the same time, in the same moment, right? And we say, that's disgusting, whereas the dog's like, that is awesome. Give me some of that, right? And we have no way of even understanding what it is that is going on in his head when he smells
his
that
motivation
kibble,
is completely different. His reward process is completely different from what we're used to.
Absolutely. And I think that's, if you really were to meet aliens, it could be something it's completely alien. And that's one of the things I really loved about that Solaris story. And it's one of the things I like about Move Along Home as well. One episode that I think that certainly sets itself up to be very ambitious that I think we should talk about is Voyager Season 4, Episode 23, Living Witness. So here we have a case where we have some alien characters that have an interaction that turns out to be disastrous with our heroes. And we have the Doctor trying to put the pieces back together in the far future. So what's going on here with this one, Ron?
So a couple things on this one. First, the primary reason I love this episode is, again, that it shows our crew in an alternate type of reality, and that what could be done. Beyond that, I look at our interpretation of ancient artifacts. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to get controversial, but you look at the Bible. We have this document that says certain things in it, and it could only be interpreted this way. And we see a very similar type of process here in the way that they interpret the history of Voyager. And that the interpretation of history is just that. It's an interpretation. It's never 100% black and white. And what the Doctor's faced with is, you people have interpreted this completely the wrong way. So how do we fix this? And the fact that at the end of the episode, he kind of decides to go home at the end. And that if you follow the timeline of Star Trek, it's my belief that if he leaves this civilization that's still in the Delta Quadrant that far advanced in the future, we may actually see him in the Discovery timeline. I could see him coming back and still existing in that period. So this episode, again, I think it does have a lot of undertones that you can read into. The interpretation of history is a big part of it. But overall, I like that it sets up where we are now in Discovery as a possibility. Is it realistic? Probably not. But it's fun to look at and say, well, what if the Doctor was to reappear? What if Discovery is exploring and all of a sudden, well, here's a shuttlecraft that has a Doctor on it from Voyager? It's just, I don't know. I love Star Trek, and it's a fun way to look at an alternate storyline and say, what if?
Well, I think you're bringing up something that's really powerful, Ron, which is that when we look at history, there are limitations based on the sources, right? And I remembered being in a history class, and this was actually a class that was actually about Roman history. Not that it matters, but what he was saying was that because we do have some primary sources from Rome, and then we have some secondary sources, and then we have archaeology and things we've dug up out of the ground to tell us about other stuff, like the ruins of Pompeii and things like that. There are certain things we know very clearly absolutely true. Like, we have very good information about certain things and what certain lives were like and things like that. There's some things that we sort of know a little bit about, and there's vast amounts we know nothing about. And the only way we know about some of those things even is because we have these tantalizing threads, or we have like a thing that we picked up in a dig that we created a story about, which historians have come to accept. And it'll never be overwritten until somebody else finds out something better, right? But this is what we're going to believe for now. Mm-hmm. And he says it's a little bit like looking through a keyhole into a room.
Right.
There's certain things you can I see that box sitting on the table, right? And I can kind of see part of the table, and I think there's a chair, and then I have no idea what's beyond that, right? That's really what it's like. And I think that's it was a good lesson for me in always, whenever I look at history, was to think about it in that way, right? Is that we're very limited by what we have. When you're looking at recent history, even, there can be disputes about, what was happening in as recently as the 1970s, right?
Mm-hmm.
What were they really thinking when they made that political decision, right? You'll have people who would try to spin it and say this, that, or the other thing, but we have some primary sources, some stuff we don't know anything about. And I think that this is a great example in Star Trek of that too. So I enjoyed the episode, and I am with you in that I hope we see the Doctor coming in Discovery. Let's bring it. All right, so let's continue on with the Doctor then. Let's talk about Voyager Season 7, Episode 2020, Author. An episode that I think takes on a little bit too much in that it's trying to tell us about the Doctor's story, but then also has the sort of the legal drama around the story. And to me, it just seemed a little bit too much packed into one episode, but I'm curious for your take on it, Ron. What's going on here?
So this is part of my trend of defending episodes that aren't considered the best of Star Trek. First off, I think, again, I've said it before, it's a fun episode. But beyond that, we see the Doctor kind of... It's like a knockoff episode of Measure of a Man, and that we're going to look at the Doctor and say, well, what rights does he have? Is he sentient? Does he have rights? And then you dig a little bit deeper, and we start to see the Doctor through his own eyes. Now, first off, Robert Picardo, I think, is one of the best parts of Star Trek Voyager. His character, it becomes so complex through the seasons. He starts so one-dimensional, I'm the Doctor and that's it. And he becomes this really layered character. But we start to see how his treatment on Voyager, through his eyes, whether we agree with it or not, is his perception of how he's been treated. I think one of the poignant points is where he has the backpack emergency holographic thing. It's not that big in reality, but for him, it feels like it's that giant burden. And it's easy for us to look at people and see, they don't have it that bad. But through their own lens, yes, they do. It can be a very different interpretation of the way that things are happening when you look at it through their own lens. And that's what we see from the Doctor. And additionally, at the end of the episode, we see his story being distributed through the mines with all the other EMHs that are now miners. I think it's great. I think it's another good piece of science fiction that gets overrated, and it provides a really deep story into how things can actually happen versus how they're interpreted by different people.
When it comes to Voyager, I often think about the character Kes, who is often overlooked or given, I don't think, given her due as a character in a lot of ways. And I think it's because of how she's positioned relative to Neelix. But I will say that one of the redeeming things I think about the Kes character is how she always stands up for the Doctor. Especially early in Voyager, where a lot of our Starfleet characters are sort of dismissive of the EMH.
Yes.
And she's constantly standing up for him. And so I give her a lot of credit for that. And I think it's one of the redeeming things about the Kes character that you reminded me of in your discussion here of Author. All right, let's talk about a Discovery episode, Season 2, Episode 2, New Eden. Now, this one comes up quite often on Trek Profiles. It has some Captain Pike in it, of course, whom you love. So tell me about this particular episode and why it's special to you.
Again, Pike is definitely my captain as we've seen him so far. And I think this story, first off, it feels like a TOS episode. It feels like a Next Generation episode. It just feels at its core very much we're exploring a species of the week. Yes, they're human, but it's a species of the week. And we see Pike's level of complexity in this episode. Despite the fact these are humans, he's going to defend that prime directive no matter what. We are not getting engaged. He puts his life on the line by letting that phaser explode right on him. And he's very adamant with Owo and Michael, you are not to break the prime directive with these people. Then we see that added level of complexity that towards the end of the episode, okay, we need something from these people. I do have the authority to bend the prime directive. I'm going to do that by making contact with them. And, was there any damage done to this society? Absolutely not. This guy knew in his heart who these people were. He knew that it was Starfleet, but he knew they were from the future, essentially. And when Pike makes that reveal, no one's harmed by it. But he's able to use his critical judgment and say, as the captain of this ship on a mission, yes, I'm going to make an exception to the prime directive this time. it just shows so many levels of complexity. And I think this episode, if I'm introducing somebody to new Star Trek who's never seen these new shows, this is the episode I'm going with, because it just at its core explains what Star Trek can be.
Would you select this one over, say, some Prodigy to show somebody who'd never seen Star Trek before?
I think so, depending on the age. If they're a child, Prodigy, yeah. But I think New Eden just it is absolutely what Star Trek means to be. If that makes sense.
You just spurred a thought in me, which is I wonder if, and this is something that I think Enterprise didn't do but could have, and I'm not saying that in a critical way, but I'm wondering if there's a series of books or novels or anything out there that says, like, this is the reason we have a Prime Directive. Which is to say, like, here's some stories of how, like, the early Federation, or, however it was before there was a Prime Directive, like, here's where it all went bad.
I love, and here's, gosh, yeah.
seven civilizations that destroyed themselves because we had bad first contact, or something. I don't know. I feel like, we could have, like, a catalog of stories of, like, this is, it should be a Star Trek novel called This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things. And,
right. And it's funny, we see pieces of that, like, with a piece of the action, we see what can happen if it goes awry, but in a way that just doesn't really address the Prime Directive specifically. I love that idea. I would like to see more short treks that tackle these sorts of concepts in a 20-minute period. I think that would be a great opportunity.
Oh, wow. Yeah, for sure. I think that'd be very entertaining. Okay, Ron, so let's talk about a Discovery episode, another Discovery episode. Let's talk about Season 3, Episode 4, Forget Me Not. And this is where Burnham and Adira visit the Trill homeworld, while Saru's efforts on the Discovery to help the crew reconnect have some surprising results. So what about this particular episode is special or meaningful for you?
This is a very deep episode of Star Trek that every time I watch it, I find myself absolutely crying at the end. So we see Saru trying to become the leader on Discovery. We're 4 episodes in. We're 900 years in the future. They haven't made connection with the Federation yet. And he's recognizing that his crew is suffering mentally. And he does a lot to try and counter that. He has dinner with the senior staff. We see the first pieces of Zora, and that we're going to watch a movie as a group together. But beyond that, we see Adira's story when she goes back to Trill. And, I'm a gay man. I'm married to a man. New Star Trek is so inclusive towards the LGBTQ community. And it gets a little bit slack from haters, but I think it's doing an incredible job of creating an inclusive place. And when you watch Adira's story with Gray on their generational ship, when Gray gets killed and she's willing to take on the symbiont, and then is rejected by Trill society when she shows up and she's not a Trill. We're not going to deal with this. We're going to ignore that. I think is a situation that a lot of folks have found themselves in. And it's not until she has that awakening and is able to connect with her prior host that they kind of come around. And personally, I've encountered people in my life that when you come out of the closet, they're not supportive until they get to know you. And their initial response is, this is horrible. This isn't the way it should be. And then they open their eyes and they get to know you. And I don't know, I find it to be a very deep and moving episode, and that she gets that embrace at the end, and we get to understand her story. And it's a beautiful story. Like I said, every time I watch this episode, I end up absolutely bawling in tears. I watched this like 2 nights ago. It's just a very, very touching story.
Yeah. And I got to say, one of the things about the episode that I really, really liked is the fact that when they announced, because I believe they did. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they did. In fact, I know they did. We knew we were going back to Trill at some point, and we were going to have a symbiont in this season somewhere. All the fans were like, it has to be Dax. Yeah. We have to find out Dax. It's Dax. And I was like, no, it must definitely not be Dax. Because if there's one thing that's like setting me over the edge sometimes with Star Trek, it's the small universe syndrome.
Yes.
That, like, we've seen the caves. There's a bajillion symbionts in there. Can't we have another one? So I really love the fact that we got a different symbiont for once. So that pleased me to no end.
Well, when we see her previous lives, we do see a couple of Starfleet officers too, which I love, because it shows the integration of Trill society with the Federation and the fact that that's become splintered. And one of the last lines that one of the Trill says, this has been a great rejoining, and hopefully next time we see you, we can talk about another type of rejoining. And it shows that optimism and hope towards the future that, yes, Trill society will likely come back into the fold. And I think we see that in season 4. I think we've seen that they've rejoined. I could be wrong, but I think we see that again.
I don't recall. I'd have to, they throw so much stuff on the screen sometimes. It's hard to you have to freeze frame and go through in slow mo and actually try to figure out which alien I'm looking at, right? Well, it is a glorious episode, and I'm glad you picked it, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to talk about it because I understand why it is a super special episode, and thank you for bringing that up, Ron. And I have to admit, I have really enjoyed this discussion, but I want to know, Ron, the real answer to the big question, which is you've just spent a couple hours talking to some rando off the internet about Star Trek. You're tweeting about it. You're spending some of your precious free time adminning a Facebook group, which people don't understand how much time that kind of stuff can actually take and the kind of thought and care that has to go into doing something like that, even though we're doing it voluntarily. So why are you spending all this time on Star Trek? What does it mean to you? Why do you care?
That's a really hard question. I knew you were going to ask that, and I've been pondering that for the last couple of days, wondering what the answer is. And the ultimate answer is, you know what? I don't really know. The smaller answer, the direct one, is I think Star Trek represents a level of hope for the future, and that the future is not perfect. In a lot of science fiction, we see two types of futuristic portrayal. Either everything's gone to hell and the Earth is burning, or everything is perfect in a utopian society. I don't think Star Trek represents either one of those. I think it might lean on the side of being a utopian society, but we see there is imperfection in the future. There are bad decisions to be made. There is still hatred. There is racism. There is war. But if we work hard, we can make it a little bit easier. Beyond that, I've always found the aesthetic of Star Trek to be incredibly pleasing. When I watched Next Generation, for the longest time, I wanted to, and I did run a hotel, because the Enterprise felt like a Marriott.
I know.
I want to be in that type of situation.
It's an airport Marriott.
I look at Discovery now, and the visuals that come from that show are just so stunning. It is just a beautiful show to watch. And I like to think that the future, apparently, is just pretty. Everything about it is visually appealing. The technology makes lives a little bit easier. And we've seen that in modern time. 20 years ago, cell phones weren't a thing. It's fun to watch TV shows from 20 years ago, sitcoms, where oftentimes the story plot is somebody can't reach somebody on the phone, and that's completely gone. Now, cell phones have made our lives easier, but it has also created new problems. And I think that's what we can see from Star Trek. It's that our replicator might be able to help solve some food problems, but there's going to be other problems down the road that we'll still have to address. It's just constantly turning that channel. So for me, Star Trek, it's all about beauty, it's all about hope, and a level of optimism.
Well, Ron, I have to say I've enjoyed our conversation, but the M5 has signaled me that it is now time for you to face the Kobayashi Maru.
Awesome.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5 just for you. Should you not only survive the tests, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our little show. Are you ready, Ron?
Let's do it.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record Ron's responses.
Simulation loaded and ready.
Which quadrant has the better vacation spots, Gamma or Delta?
Delta.
Phasers on stun or phasers on disintegrate?
Stun.
You're going back in time. Which of these would be worse? The eugenics wars or the Bell riots?
The eugenics wars.
Choose your Captain Kirk wisdom. What does God need with a starship, or no blah blah blah?
What does God need with a starship?
And finally, who's going to write your biographical holonovel? Barclay or the EMH?
Barclay.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing answers.
Ron, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has determined that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
Awesome.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our program. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Ron is awarded the title of Chief Assistant Xeno Mixologist for 10 Forward.
So there you go.
That's great.
So, Ron, please tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to continue the conversation. And also, please tell us that if someone happens to be up in Bar Harbor, where can they go and sample your coffee and hang out at your coffee shop?
If they happen to be in Bar Harbor, swing by Acadia Perk. We have the best Ractigino this side of the Delta Quadrant. And then if you're on social media, you can follow me at TrekkerRon, where it's all Star Trek all the time. If you're on Facebook, check out the unofficial Star Trek Convention Experiences page. We're about 6,000 or 5,000 members strong right now, and just getting really excited for the cruise, Mission Chicago, and of course, the 56-year mission coming up in August.
Ron, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I must remind you that you may send us your friendly hails, your photon torpedo barrages of fury, or recordings of yourself lip-syncing a Kirk speech to feedback@trekprofiles.com, or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be converted into boronite and fed into a DMA. This time, I leave you with a quote from Neelix, who in the episode Caretaker said, quote, "Since you're not interested in my debris, well, I'm delighted to know you." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
All right, man. I told you, as I tell everybody, you always, it's okay to ask to be on the show. It's just going to be a while.
Yeah.
you never know. I don't put out as many episodes as I probably would be able to if I was like doing nothing but this. So with life and everything, it's just like one a month is just about all I can do. So
I'll tell you though, your podcast is so much fun, and that it really does. I feel like I've met so many people through your podcast that I've never talked to, never messaged through Facebook, Twitter. I mean, but you see these people at the conventions, and it feels like you know each other. It's incredible.
Yeah, or I was just looking at my my stats, which I rarely do, actually, and I was looking at my podcast stats. And one of the most listened episodes that I've had has been with one of the new people, one of the new fans.
Interesting.
And I thought that was just so interesting to me.
I love it.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's very interesting because you never know what they're going to say when I get them on.
Well, and I think it's important. It's a good way to plug them into the community. It really is.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And sometimes they have their own takes, which are quite different than what other people think, which I also enjoy. No, it's just I find I just get a better discussion when I can see who I'm talking to. I don't know why. I think it just helps.
Yep.
I've done some of these with the disembodied voice coming from on high, and it's just not as good.
No, it's awkward to record too. It really is. You can't make that eye contact. It's awkward enough being on video and not in person. Yeah. We'll get into this, I'm sure, during the show, but the podcasts have really... I love the podcasts. I'm so fascinated by them. I wish I had the time to do one, but it's incredible the work that goes into it for you folks. It's a lot of work. I don't think a lot of people see that.
Yeah, I don't think people really recognize that. They're like, yeah, you just turn on the recorder and go, right? And, there are podcasts where you can... I mean, if you set it up so that you're just turning on the recorder and just doing like a 30-minute convo or even like a 3-hour conversation. And then, you know that you're just going to send it out as is. And that's kind of what your show is. Great.
Yeah.
But for this show, I feel an obligation to any guest that I have on to make them feel like it's a really solid episode because the kind of show that this is, you really only get to come on once.
I appreciate
so
that.
I feel like I want to fix everything, and like not have any problems or issues, and the bonus content and all that, I don't edit those too much. And if you listen carefully, like you'll hear a lot more mouth noises and hiccups and people going, oh, well, I don't know. I don't really mess with that stuff in the bonus content because it's bonus. It's like you don't have to listen to it. But like the meat of the show, I try to keep it good.
And I've done a little bit of video work in my prior life in an office job, and you're so much more critical when you're the one creating it and the ones listening to it. As a listener, it sounds perfect every episode, but when you're designing it, you're like, nope, that's so wrong. I can hear lip smacking, I can hear tongue noises. Yeah.
You know what is really the weird thing that surprised me getting into podcasting, and I've done audiovisual production on a low level for some work that I do, but really doing podcasting is I'll get done with an interview and I'll think, man, that was just like, I could just wrap that, do the wrappers and like send it, like it was perfect. Like there was no problems. We didn't have any issues. Like everything was just great. And then I put it into the audio rack and I actually start editing the thing. And I'm like, oh man, I got to get my surgical tools out. I got to cut this and move
12 hours later.
like it is. And like, you don't hear, because in real life, in person, when you're talking to people, you have, so remember whatever Star Trek episode it is, I think it's Heart of Glory, where they send LaForge over to the Klingon ship. And, Picard's looking at the through the Geordi visor, on the view screen. And he's like, how can you make sense of all that? And he's like, I don't know. I just pay attention to what I want and ignore the rest, right? So when you're having a conversation with another human, we are not even aware of the things that we are disregarding. And we don't hear the fan in the background, the beeping of the truck outside. You don't hear the lip smacking noises, the weird little pauses that we all do, or these verbal tics where someone will say, well, or, well, every single time they answer a question. Well, but then when you put the thing in the editing rack and you're going, oh my God, this is a disaster. This is a horror show.
Well, and I studied communication for a while, and so much of it too is stuff that we talked about the video. If you can't see the person, you're missing so much of those verbal cues. I talk with my hands. You'll see them bouncing up and down. And it's when you take that out from the communication style, you lose so much of what's being transmitted back and forth. It's really incredible. So I think it's fun to get into the controversial issues. Absolutely.
Yeah, but you have to discuss them in a way that allows for that, right? Nuance.
Absolutely.
And I think online, no matter what the venue, I think they're all sort of similar in this, and that they suck a lot of that nuance out. And one of the rules I follow that has served me pretty well, I think, is that if I wouldn't say it right to your face, person to person, I wouldn't say it online.
Exactly.
So,
and that's where the social media lets you take that face away, and you can be totally anonymous.
Yeah, you can just be a total jerk,
exactly.
to people around you. And I just think, oh, this is not the kind of person I want to be. I used to live in Maine. I don't know if I ever mentioned that to you.
No.
But
whereabouts?
Yeah, I used to in Portland.
Oh, cool.
Right in downtown. I worked on Middle Street.
Oh, yeah.
And I lived in some apartments that was like, half a mile away. Because I got recruited to go work for a consulting firm that was down there. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah. But anyway, I totally understand that like Bar Harbor is like a seasonal place.
Oh, yes. Which is nice. In the winter we can calm down. And
Yeah. You open your business. You make your money during the summer, and then you shut all that stuff down, right? Yep. And during winter, you just hole up. It's a very New England thing to do.
Oh, yes.
So I got some insane costumes lined up for this, some of which I think people will need therapy, which I'm sorry for having caused. Having people see me in some of these costumes, I think it's going to be a terrible experience.
So are you sharing ahead of time what you're dressing as, or is it going to be a surprise?
Well, no, what the events are is not a secret. So the first night is the Gorn Toga Party.
Oh, cool.
So I have a toga lined up. Which is probably a little bit more revealing than a man of my age and physique should probably wear, but I'm going for it. Awesome. So we have that. We have Q's costume party. So I have a Q mashup costume. So two different costumes that Q actually wore, I'm putting together and wearing at the same time for that. So it's actually, I'll tell you what it is. So Q appeared as a monk in one episode. So I have a monk's outfit that's mashed up with the French officer's costume that he also appeared in.
That's awesome.
So I have both at the same time. So I will be the French officer monk Q costume. So I have that. Then there's a Mirror Universe night. So I have a Mirror Universe costume with a sash and like all the Mirror Universe stuff to go along with that.
Love it.
Then there's Roaring 20s night. So I have a Roaring 20s style costume to go there. And then there's the ball. And for the Federation ball, which is the closest thing they have to a formal night on a cruise, I have a Star Trek motion picture Admiral Kirk uniform.
Oh, that's awesome.
The green and white, you know the one I'm talking about?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
So I have that. So I'm going to wear that for a formal night.
That's awesome.
That took a little bit of getting together because you have to buy the costume and then you have to find someone that's selling the correct pin.
Yep.
Because that's not like a regular pin that like a lot of people would have. There's a guy on Etsy that makes those. So I got that on it. So I was buying like all this stuff on Etsy, on Amazon, on eBay. I had like deliveries coming to the house for a week.
Hopefully our friends at Fansets are listening to this and that'll be their next announcement is the motion picture pin because they've been doing such a good job with those insignias.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I bought some Fanset stuff. So one night is the Ryzian Festival of the Moon or something.
Oh, that'll be
so
fun.
I had to buy a Fansets Horgon pin. So I have that on an Aloha shirt. Will be my costume for that, along with party beads. So I got that. Yeah. Anyway, no one wants to hear about my stuff. We're here to talk about you. So let's talk about you. Fantastic. Wonderful. So I'm not gonna put this in the episode, but I will say one of the things I enjoy about shows like The Expanse and Babylon 5 is that they actually show a sci-fi future that's really just a straight line from today. Right. I mean, you still got political parties. You still got, political problems. You've got different factions. You've got money, who has it, who doesn't, and people who don't have it want it, and it's like all the normal stuff is there. It's just now we have spaceships and we might be doing extraterrestrial stuff, but it's like the same people, it's the same people as we have today. So that's kind of one of the reasons I like those shows.
And I think that's
a little bit more straight line.
I think that's why I like the Ferengi to a certain level. They're gross little aliens. They're misogynistic, but being all about profits, as a business owner, for me, I resonate with that. Where Quark has his hourly projections. When we're open, if I'm not looking at my phone every 10 minutes to see how the sales are doing for the day, I'm absolutely there for it. So I kind of see that side, and that's why I have an appreciation for the Ferengi, that they're not that far off from where we are right now.
Right on. So let's talk about that for a second though. So you run a coffee shop?
Yep, I own a coffee shop.
Did I get that right?
Yep,
you own a coffee shop? Where are you getting your coffee from?
We have a roaster that's local, about an hour away, a family friends that they do all our roasting for us. They import from all over the world.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Oh man. I'm feeling like I want to have some.
One of the things I've had fun collecting recently is the mugs from the various series. So I got the Janeway mug from the Kickstarter campaign. I found this guy on the internet. They just re-released them. I'm looking for a Picard mug now. I'm like, if I own a coffee shop, let's have all the different drinkware that goes with all these different coffees.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, I think they call that the one from Deep Space Nine was called the Hot Joe or the Hojo.
Something like that. It's highwave.com. And this has become my favorite coffee mug. I mean, beyond the fact that it looks Star Trek, this is my go-to mug right now because it's huge. The thing holds like 24 ounces of coffee.
I know, but don't you find it hard to clean the insides? I mean,
I rinse it out.
Down the...
Oh no.
I mean, I don't know if I'd want to make like a hot cocoa in that thing because there'd probably be like little bits in the bottom, and I wouldn't be able to clean them. It would make me berserk, man. I don't know. I'd be really upset.
Well, and we've done the cruises, and I always do the drinking package for the simple reason I'm too cheap. It makes no sense, but if I have to pay for every drink, I'm not drinking at all. If I know they're included, I'm going to go overboard. So I always do the drinking package. I don't get my money's worth, but...
Oh my God. Which line do you like to go on?
Norwegians are our primary.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I haven't been on Norwegian. We've been on Princess mostly.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We just did one over the holidays. We were gone for 15 days.
Oh,
round trip, Fort Lauderdale. So yeah.
I keep telling my husband, like, we've cruised a lot. And I said, I'm going to book the cruise for us. We're going to show up and do it. And I just won't tell him it's the Star Trek cruise until we're like boarding on the ship and he sees all these costumes. Like, why not?
Oh, see, there has to be, what was I looking at? What was it, a Star Trek cruise thing? I can't remember now, but there was something I was looking at that was a Star Trek thing where they had like a spouse event that was like completely non-Star Trek.
Oh, I saw that.
And it was like, was that a Star Trek cruise thing?
I think it was in one of the Facebook groups. Yeah. I don't know why I'm in the Facebook groups. I've never done the cruise, but I'm in all the groups.
Oh yeah, so they're going to have like some kind of thing where it's like, they're going to go like do painting or something, awesome. And have like a picnic and a tour, and it has meanwhile all the spouses are like, Trekkie man,
right? Probably an easy time to get to the spa on the ship, that's for sure.
Well, the next time you're in Vegas, man, just let me know. And, I'd love to just meet up and have a coffee or whatever.
Absolutely. We'll be out there. November's our next trip planned at the end of the season. Unfortunately, I won't be at STLV this year.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Is Mission Chicago like your big thing for the year?
It is. And we found last week taking a week in the middle of August it was hard for everybody staying behind. So I'll be stationed here all summer, but definitely November, we're coming to Vegas. So I'll hit you up for sure. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll be here. It's one of the things that is really bothering me about this year's STLV is that they scheduled it so late that my kid's already in school.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a problem because I drive carpool and like I literally have to worry about carpool and making sure he's getting where he needs to be. Mm-hmm. And, I still have to, not that I help him with his homework, but, I got to ride him about doing his schoolwork and stuff. Yeah. So, and my wife works late, so she works in the evenings. And so I'm usually the guy doing the evening stuff, homework, get ready for school the next day, get your clothes ready,
right.
All that stuff. So when he's not in school, it's not a big deal. But now that he's in school and like they scheduled like the last week in August, yeah. So it's not going to work out for me. I mean, I'll go, but I'm not going to be able to like stay at the hotel and have like the full on experience. It's not.
It kills me. I think just the fact that it's off strip this year too. Or on strip. You're going to find a lot more diversity where people are staying. I don't know. I felt like last STLV, the 55 year, that was it because and I think a lot of people are going to be splintered going to Chicago now, doing the cruise or Vegas. I don't know. I think we've lost that sense of community for that event.
See, one of the things I was just talking about this with somebody else. One of the things that I thought makes STLV a little special is that the Rio is sort of isolated.
Yeah.
And you're all sort of at nerd camp together.
Exactly.
And, I always feel bad for the normies who were staying there, and like they book a Vegas vacation to the Rio and then they're like, what the hell is going on here? The week of STLV. But like, it is primarily, it's like the Star Trek thing is, we're kind of it.
Yeah.
Once you're on the strip, you're subsumed into a much wider world of craziness. And right. So I don't know if I don't even know if staying at the hotel and all that would have that same experience.
Well, even that location, you've got so many hotels just right there. When I had booked, because it was going to be at Bally's in December 2020 when I had booked that, and I was staying at the Link, I think, which wasn't the official. I don't know. There's so many options.
No, the Link is right where that convention center is.
Yeah, but the official hotel was the Flamingo.
It was going to be at the Caesars Convention Center.
Yeah.
But the Flamingo and the Link are right next to each other. They're right there. That is not a big thing. It's not like you're staying at like the Excalibur or something, right. Which would have been like a hike. But I mean, even like staying at the Bally's, like the Paris is attached. So maybe some people will be staying at the Paris.
Yeah.
Some people will be staying at the Bally's. Some people will be staying, wherever else they want to stay. So I think it's just going to be a different experience, but I'll definitely be there. I will buy a ticket and I will, attend, a day attend.
Yeah.
But I know that like some mornings I'm going to have to drive the carpool and I'm going to have to do the afternoon pickup, which is like right in the middle of everything.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to have to be picking up the kids, and getting everybody home. And, then do I really want to go back?
Right.
Cause it's going to be a trek if I want to do that. I'm sorry for that pun. I apologize.
I will be living vicariously through you and everyone else that week for sure, though. I keep telling myself, it's fine. I'm going to Chicago. I won't miss Vegas. I'm going to miss Vegas.
Yeah, you will. Well, I think Chicago, too, just because of the way that the McCormick is set up. It's like everyone's going to be staying different places. I think it's going to be the same there.
It's interesting. It's a giant complex that has 3 Hilton hotels attached to it. So besides that, there's the mirror. Are you going to Chicago?
It's like 2 weeks after the cruise. There's no
Oh,
way.
that's right. Yeah. I'll be anxious to see what the attendance is.
It's like 2 weeks after it gets back, or 3 weeks after.
I know a lot of people are in
my
this situation.
feeling about the 55-year mission, I felt like there was a lot less than usual people, but a lot more than I'd expected.
I agree. Absolutely.
It was like you could, like, it was full-ish, but it wasn't full. It wasn't sold out. And like, you could get into anything you wanted to get. Not that, I mean, at STL, you always could get into things.
Yeah.
It's not like a normal Comic-Con in that way, but it just was surprising to me that there were as many people there as there were.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember getting George Takei's autograph in the line. It was just wall to wall people. And that was the only moment I was like, is this really, am I in this giant crowd of people right now? I haven't been in a crowd like this for 2 years. But
it's a little weird, right?
Yeah, I think for Chicago, it's going to be different. There's a lot of people doing the cruise that won't go. And they've been so slow releasing information. I think a lot of people just aren't going to go. Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully it has a huge attendance, but we'll see. I think Vegas is still the place to be.
I even bought like a big sign for my door. I made a podcast sign.
I love it.
And I have door magnets with the podcast info on it. So I'll have that up, and like people can take a magnet. So maybe I'll get some listeners out of it. I don't know. We'll see. But then there's more that are, but I always try to make the episodes evergreen, right? That's why I try to stay away from news.
As we've been moving and getting everything ready for the house, I've been listening to just a ton of podcasts. I started your collection from the very beginning, and I'm working my way forward again. And they're fun. You do a great job, so keep it up.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah.
It's really weird when because podcasting is essentially a very solitary activity in a lot of ways. I mean, you do the interviews, or whatever you do, but actually editing and doing all the other stuff is very solitary, and you just sort of hit the publish button and you get these numbers. I get a number, and it tells you, your episodes have been downloaded this many times, and they're listening on this platform or that platform, and here's your Spotify versus your Google versus your Apple, so what? But you never really know what people think, because 99.9% of people who listen to any podcast will never say anything.
Exactly.
Even if they love it,
yeah.
They never say anything, which is why, since doing this for the, 3 years now? Yeah, almost 3 years. No, it is 3 years, I think. I have tried very hard to reach out to creators that I listen to and just say, hey, I love what you're doing. Even if it's just that.
One of the first couple episodes I listened to was Heather, because Tricorder, I want to hear that. Bill and Dan, Trek Geeks. I mean, you go for the people that you're familiar with, and then you learn your style and say, you know what, I'm going to listen to all these people I've never heard of. And it is such a fun way to listen to people.
Oh, I'm glad you like it, Ron.
Yeah.
That means a lot to me. It really does. So I appreciate that. It's always a good thing when people tell you that they like what you're doing.